video demonstrates how to replace an AC compressor on a Volvo V40 2003. First note, please ignore the unsafe setup that I've got with the ramps here. They didn't quite fit under the vehicle, so I had to do something that was not very smart and not to be recommended. Secondly, if you're going to be replacing the AC compressor, you need to properly evacuate the system, which means going into a shop and having them pull any refrigerant out. And lastly, if you're going to be replacing any of the AC components, you must replace O-rings, any O-rings of the fittings you're taking apart.
First step is to remove the splash panel underneath, which I've already done. Actually, I didn't have it on my vehicle. And the second step is to remove both AC hoses that connect up to the compressor here. It's easier if you remove the single 10mm bolt there to give this hose some play. And then as for the other hose, it runs from the driver's side in a left-hand side vehicle up and over the engine mounts over to the compressor, and it can be it doesn't have much give in itself. There it is there, unless you head down next to the right down here, you'll see there's a hole where there was a bolt, a 10mm bolt, and a bracket for the AC hose. If you take that out, then you get some wiggle room, which allows you to install the AC compressor and then insert the hose. So at this point in time, dealing with all of that stuff, I've got 4 long bolts that I need to get rid of. The first one, as you can see, is right there, and I'm accessing it with a swivel wrench, and it's 12mm, and they are super long. They go from this side all the way to the back. Can you see that? All the way to there. And so it takes a bit to take that out, so I'm going to do that now. Long time. Take your time. Second bolt can be accessed from the same side using the same swivel wrench, and again it takes a bit. Apologies for the sound. As you can see, it is super tight with the radiator, so again it doesn't come out. It just it's right here. Doesn't come out, just needs to be loose. The radiator's in the way, so you just lower it with both bolts in. You've also got to disconnect that little white connector right above the bolt in this pick. Don't forget to do that. Do it early so that you don't start pulling the AC compressor down only to realize that you've forgotten. Fourth bolts are pretty straightforward. Get at them with whatever you want. They're right here. Again, they're 12s. The first time I did this a few years back, these long bolts were difficult to get out, so I actually heated up both mounting points, and that seemed to help. So I'll use the swivel socket for both of these, like so. There you go. You get the idea. Be really careful of the drain connection for the radiator here. So make sure these bolts are out. There we go. Tilt it towards the clutch side. I think that other bolt is sticking up there. There we go. Yes, it is. There we go. Other bolt is unstuck. And there is room. It's hard to believe. Push it forward and then out. Again, being very careful, rotating it a little bit to work around that radiator. Just enough room. Okay. So compressor's back out. Just a few tips here. So when I refilled the refrigerant to 70 milliliters, I refilled half of it through this side, the demand side, I guess. And that didn't work because the minute I put it horizontally, I had a good 15 to 20 mils leak out. So I'm going to refill from the supply side, I'm guessing is what that means, and then reinstall the compressor. So I'm putting 20 milliliters back into here using a syringe. The syringe I'm using is just something I got from the pharmacy. They'll give them to you for free. They're 10 mils. Back up. I find it, based on my 3 times doing this, put this back on, keep it on while you're reinstalling the compressor. Save yourself a bunch of dripping everywhere. Again, keep the bolts in, and most of this involves just checking on the bolts as you put it back in. So let's try the same technique. Angle it slightly towards the right-hand side. Slip it in further than it needs to be. Again, being very careful of that radiator. The radiator gives a little bit, I noticed, so it's okay to push a little bit. Now the bolts will be in the way. Force it into place a little bit, and you should be good. Then it's a matter of backing out the bolts, all 4, making sure you can get the compressor to where it needs to go. It means getting your left hand reaching it up, getting the top 2 bolts way out of the way, bottom bolt out of the way. Feels like it should go. Problem is you run out of arm strength as you're halfway through this. I feel like I need to back this up or something. I think it's super heavy. There we go. Got it. Try and get 1 bolt in. Once you got 1 in, you can work on getting a second one in, just ever so slightly, and then you can go up top, push 1 in. There we go. Get all 4 of them in by hand if you can, just a little bit. It's back in, the bolts are out. Really just tighten those bolts back up, and don't forget to replug the connector that goes into that female black socket visible there. Put this one on. I just do this fast so we don't get much leakage here. 1. 2. Get that in there. 13. Make sure you replace the O-rings. Good. Sure they're sitting flush. They are. It looks good. Good. Okay. Clean it up so that you can see if there are any leaks that develop afterwards. Things you have to reconnect. You can see the bolt hole and the clamp there. And then underneath, you've got to reconnect this hose, the AC hose, to its fitting right here. Mine's all busted up, but at least I'll hook it up into there. Hard to see, but right there, right there. Remover, so you can screw that right out. It doesn't take much pressure. So there it is there. Tap that valve core off. As part of this, I'm going to replace the valve cores. You want to make sure you're replacing it with something of the same size. Right now, but as you can see, loops in under the AC compressor, up over the alternator pulley, the small one, back down below all the way to the bottom to the harmonic balancer, loops around the harmonic balancer, and eventually it will make its way under this tensioner visible right in the middle of the picture. But I've got to put that insert in the T60 hole first, right here.
Couple of closing notes as you're watching a replay of me taking out the AC compressor. One is if you are going to replace any component of the AC system, you might as well replace the dryer. It's a cheap piece that will prevent too much moisture from accumulating in the AC system. So it's located on the driver's side, just behind the battery. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, make sure you replace all the O-rings that you have access to when you take components of the system apart. Lastly, don't make the assumption that the compressor comes with the right type of PAG oil or the right quantity. So best to drain it and then refill it with the right type and quantity. Lastly, just another note around refrigerant. Just make sure your system is either empty to start or you've had it properly evacuated by professionals, and then you can do the work you need to do, and then bring it back in and get it refilled correctly. I've done the do-it-yourself method a few times with the small cans. I'm not sure it's worth the trouble. On this particular one, I tried doing it with the cans and it didn't take for whatever reason, and I brought it in and the mechanics had no issue refilling the system correctly.